Hello, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of Battle Chat this week. I'm Josh, and I'm with my co-host Luis.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
And this week we're talking another Pioneer deck tech. We've got Rakdos Transmogrify, piloted by Marco, who's a team member of Chad Magic, and he's been doing very well with this deck. So, Marco, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you guys for having me here. Really happy and humbled, of course, to have the chance to tell you about this deck that's been doing really well for me. As Josh said, it's Rakdos Transmogrify. But maybe a quick introduction about myself. So as Josh said, my name is Marco, or John Marco, if you want to say the complete name. Living in Germany now, part of the Chad Magic team since its very early inception. Had the pleasure to play a lot of Magic games with Luis, and also, of course, I know Josh. So really happy to be here, and finally telling you a deck that made me perform really well, made me do a couple of top 8 in RCQs, and also made me win one big tournament here in Germany. So yeah, thank you again for having me here.
Of course.
It's a pleasure having you on Marco. So we'll get straight into the deck. So the deck you're showcasing for us is Rakdos Transmogrify. Now, what is the aim of the deck? What does it do to win? What is the deck's sort of plan?
Yeah, so the deck, of course, the namesake card is Transmogrify, right? So that card costs 4 mana, 1 red and 3 colorless. And basically what it does, you target one of your creatures, right? That creature gets exiled, and then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit another creature that you can then put on the battlefield, right? So you're cheating some big creature into play. Now, of course, the way the deck works is that you only have one creature in your deck, which is Atraxa, Grand Unifier. So you're always guaranteed to hit Atraxa if you're using Transmogrify on one of your tokens. So that's how let's say the main strong point of the deck. Yeah, you can cheat Atraxa as early as turn 4, but on top of that, because you're playing Rakdos kind of cards, you have a very grindy package. You have a lot of interaction. You have hand hate, you have removals, you have also planeswalkers with Obnixilis, and all this enables you to actually cast Transmogrify relatively safe. And then grant that sweet turn 4 or turn 5 Atraxa, and basically just win from there. Because
So you're basically taking the Rakdos sort of mid-range shell, and then you're putting this broken sort of almost combo package into it to present a game-winning threat and overrun your opponent with resources, and eventually just winning them with a big Phyrexian mummy.
Yes, with wings.
Exactly. And one, similarity that we can obviously point out is there is the card Indomitable Creativity. Indomitable Creativity is a very powerful card, and it is usually what is used for these styles of strategies. Why do you use Transmogrify instead of Indomitable Creativity?
Yeah. So, that's obviously my take, but there is 2 things, in my opinion, that really make Transmogrify a bit more interesting than Creativity. First of all, I think Creativity wouldn't work in this exact shell, because if you were to change Transmogrify for Creativity, then obviously you will need a different target than Atraxa, because if you were to Creativity for 2, then you will end up with 2 Atraxa, which is it's okay, but not as strong as maybe 2 Voltborn Tyrant, which is what now Creativity has been running. Transmogrify also enables me to have Giganta, and Giganta as a companion in this deck is really amazing, because actually, one, it enables you to hardcast Atraxa, which this deck otherwise will really struggle to do, besides using the treasures from Fable or from the Bankbuster. But Giganta is also an additional threat. So especially in grindy matches like against Rakdos Vampire, which a lot of people are playing these days, having actually an extra threat when you're in the top deck war, that goes a long way. And very often, actually, against Vampire, you end up winning just because you're swinging with a 5/5.
Of course.
And you end up beating them like that.
And if I've understood it right, it also allows you to play artifacts like Reckoner Bankbuster, which are great value pile cards.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Talking about maybe exactly that card, Reckoner Bankbuster, that card is the kind of card you want to see in your starting hand against vampires, because it's one of the cards that actually makes you win that matchup simply by getting better card advantage than them. And just talking one last time about Rakdos Vampire, since it's such a big share of the meta, this deck has a really, really, really good win percentage against Rakdos Vamp, because you simply do a bigger nonsense than them, right? They can go Vein Ripper, but then once you go Atraxa, the Atraxa usually is bigger than Vein Ripper, unless they pump it, of course, with Soaring. So you're doing bigger nonsense, and I think you can grind the game much better. Your top decks tends to be better than them. Personally, I'm 7-1 versus Rakdos Vampire on big paper events, so it really, really performs well against those kind of decks.
I guess they're a big threat as well. The fact that when they attack, they tap that creature too, which means that your Vigilance, Flying, Lifelinker with Death Touch is can take out their Sorin, or even just negate any sort of damage that Vein Ripper's done to yourself. So why don't we just talk? I know you've alluded to the sort of meta position against probably the most represented deck or most powerful deck in the format currently. What position would you say the deck is across the meta? Because you got to think about like Phoenix, you got to think about the End Soul Artifact decks, the aggro decks, all that good stuff. What's the position of the deck that you found throughout the meta? Like, what decks do you want to see, and what decks don't you want to see?
Yeah. So first of all, let me start by saying this deck. If you look at some of those websites where you can see share of the meta, I think right now is a whooping 0.4%. So it's a bit of a hipster choice, if you want to put it like that. But because it's relatively niche, a lot of people think you're playing some other deck. I had a lot of people thinking I was on Rakdos Vampire, even though I was, declaring Giganta as my companion.
I love that. I love that. I love that, Duke.
So a lot of people think I'm on Vampire and then just tap out game 1 so I can cast Transmogrify turn 4. But the kind of decks you want to see. So yeah, you want to see definitely Rakdos Vampire. You really have a strong matchup against that, and I think it's one of the good reasons to play the deck. If you expect a lot of vampires, is actually very good against slick shot decks. So Gruul Prowess, red deck. This deck actually performs really well, and that's simply because you have a lot of removals for single targets. Yeah. So those kind of decks, they don't tend to go really wide. They tend to have maybe 1-2 creatures at best, and then they try to pump or use burn spell. So you have a lot of interaction, and obviously once you go and have your Atrax on the battlefield, then they usually just concede.
That makes sense.
There is no way for them to recover from that. So yeah, hyper aggressive decks like slick shot decks, which are very popular, vampires decks. I find the deck to be also quite good against the likes of Amalia, because again you have a lot of. I mean, if you can see here on the instance, you have 10 removals that are instant speed, which are quite relevant. And then on the sideboard, you also have Hidetsugo, Consumes All, which also exile graveyard, deals with Amalia stuff. You have Extinction Event, like all stuff that it's Amalia players don't like to see. Those I would say they are the most.
It's all instant speed removal, but it's also every bit of removal spell I've just noticed hits pretty much every threat in Amelia as well, because you got Torch the Tower. You can bargain it to deal 3 damage. Amelia's only got 2 toughness. Shield's Edict can get around protection spells. Heartless Act. Yeah.
If only you could also hit Josh's pronunciation of cards. Oh, wouldn't that be? Amalia, yeah, good old.
Yeah.
What did I say?
You said Amelia, like Amelia, Amelia Earhart or something like that.
I'm trying to sound cultured, okay?
Okay.
I'm the only common Brit here. You both have like sexy foreign accents, and I'm here saying Amalia or Amelia, whatever.
Fair enough. very interesting with the removal package as well, that it's so varied and so well put together for the threats of the format. And then it allows you to also play really well with your hand hate that can answer a lot of the problems you can't actually hit with the removal spells. Because looking at it, you can see that your overall answers to some of the more problematic things like Soren himself, while you have Shieldred's Edict, it's not quite quick enough to answer him before he does his thing. However, Thoughtseize will allow you to remove either the Vein Ripper or the Soren himself, or against things like Phoenix, where your removal package is okay, but not fantastic. You do have 2 towards the tower. Your Thoughtseize will allow you to remove the more problematic cards first before they can get going. How have you found that Phoenix matchup? Is it something that you're able to contend with? Is it a bit too fast for you? What's the take there?
So on paper events, I think I'm 4-0 against Phoenix. So I will, it feels like this deck is really well positioned. However, when playing this deck on Arena or MTGO, it doesn't feel like extremely favored. I would say it's a 50-50. Like if you're expecting so much Phoenix, I don't think this deck will perform bad, but also don't expect to have easy wins here and there. As you said, game 1, yes, you do have quite some interaction with Phoenix, especially with Torch the Tower is good because it exiles the Phoenix, and you have Bank Buster, so you can go for a long game. But then I would say they have also the tools to just gain a lot of card advantage to Treasure Cruise. I mean, you know the deck better than me, Luis, so you know what kind of stuff the deck is capable for.
The problem that Phoenix presents is the fact that Transmogrify says exile target creature, and unlike Creativity, where you can exile an artifact, you can actually respond to the casting of Transmogrify and kill the creature that you're targeting. So a deck like Phoenix, although it's really low in counter spells, you have to play around sort of the fact that they could kill. So if you have like a Bank Buster, for example, where it goes beyond their removal spells or a lot of their removal spells, you could probably Transmogrify that, for example. But a lot of the time, if you're creating a token that can easily be killed by pretty much every removal spell in the deck,
correct,
you've got to really time your spells correctly.
And you're fully right, Josh, because that's exactly what happens in the Phoenix matchup, right? So if they know you're on Transmogrify, they will always try to leave up maybe 1 red mana or I don't know, blue mana for Spell Pierce, something like that, just to stop you from doing Transmogrify. If you are able to do Transmogrify against Phoenix, then you probably win with an Atraxa. It will be really hard for them to get back in the game. And that's why for matchups like Phoenix, but I put also the likes of Mono Black, that they tend to run a lot of cheap removal. You want to play the slow game, and you also there is a very, I think, nice interaction. And now I'm looking more at the mana base of the deck that you can do. And I feel like it's one of the strongest card in the deck actually, which is Mutavault, right? So Mutavault obviously is a target for Transmogrify. And what you can do, you can tap Mutavault for 1 colorless mana and then use that colorless mana to actually activate the Mutavault. So it will be like a tapped Mutavault on the battlefield, which you can then Transmogrify, right? So you could go turn 5, you just drop your Mutavault, tap it, you activate it, and then Transmogrify. And this is super good because a lot of people, they feel safe. They see you just have 4 lands, an empty board. They're like, you know what, I can tap out. There's no way he can cast Transmogrify. And then, they have a rude awakening.
That's brilliant. So why don't we actually talk about the mana base then? Should we talk about the mana base now, since it's a good segue? So just talk through sort of like the utility lands, sort of like your use of how many basics, etc. Just chat through the land base if you can.
Yeah. So the land base you see in total is 26 lands. Yeah, so it's quite a big mana base. But that's also because the deck wants to play the long game, right? So it's not a deck that puts a lot of pressure from, the first 2-3 turns, I would say. So you want to play the long game, and the deck can also make use of the big mana that it gets, through the various turns. So the mana base, basically I'm playing all the Rakdos dual lands. I decided to go only 3 fast lands and 4 slow lands, so the 4 Haunted Ridges. That's because, again, the deck, doesn't need to be super explosive. It's not a Rakdos deck that wants to, fight the opponent very, very quickly. So that's the direction I went. But the real interesting things, as I said, is Mutavault, but also Mirrex. Mirrex can also generate tokens. In fact, can generate tokens at instant speed. And Mirrex sometimes can actually act as your win conditions. Like, believe it or not, I definitely won a couple of games through poison counters, which I'm sure you, Josh, love to hear that as a Infect pro player. Yeah. And especially, I had a game against Bring to Light in one RCQ, and I saw his hand through a Totsis or the rest, I don't remember, but he had like a hand with 3 removals. I think he had Leyline Binding and
they all answer Traxa really well.
Exactly, right? All stuff that can handle a Traxa very well, but can also stop Transmogrify. And basically there my plan was, okay, I'm going to make as many Might tokens as I can with my Mirrex. And the guy in the end died through poison tokens and he started using Leyline Binding on Mites, just to try to stay alive, which for me is already a big win. So yeah, Mirrex super good. I'm even thinking if it makes sense to add one more Mutavault or one more Mirrex. It might, of course, impact a bit the mana base because you end up with quite some colorless lands. But they really perform well. And then, of course, you have Sokazan. Yeah, I think it's super good in this deck because you can play it at instant speed. And, is another way to trick the opponent. They think they're safe. They see you with 4 mana, empty board. Then you use the channel ability of Sokazan, end of their turn, and then Transmo.
And so it's a very interesting mana base as well, because being a Giganta deck, your deck is naturally not very color pip heavy. It doesn't require, 2 red pips, 2 black pips, or more per card. You have very few cards that use a red and a black. In fact, the only one in the main board I can see is Obnixilis. Nothing else does that. Everything else is either a single pip plus some colorless mana, or one of your 1-drops. Cards like Fable and Case of the Skeleton are very easy to use with being a 3-mana card with only a single pip required, which allows cards like Mutavault, Mirrex, and these other colorless lands to be used effectively. So it's a really interesting way that this mana base, while it seems like a heavy Rakdos mana base, is so free to do what it likes to do.
Exactly. I mean, you said it correctly. In the end, this deck wants to be as smooth as it can when it comes to the color and mana access. The deck can make use to. And I think this mana base is, let's say, fantastic. In a sense, I never really had any issue. I mean, again, you're running 26 lands, so if you are on the draw and you have only 2 lands in your starting hand, and you can just keep it, and there is a very high likelihood you will hit your 3rd land drop and then 4th. So I really like the mana base. I will suggest not to go lower or higher, of course. Maybe one more Mirrex, one more Mutavault, one of the 2, I don't know, but overall I think it's really good. Only have 2 basic, but again, it's rare they use Field of Ruins as a wasteland, and then you cannot get anything.
How good's your mono black matchup?
The mono black matchup is a tricky one. Again, I don't think the deck is unfavored. I think it's a bit more difficult than Vampire, but it's definitely beatable. Like, you basically need to do a bit their same strategy. You need to check their hand, see if they have removal or not, and just find that perfect turn to Transmogrify. Again, if you do a Traxa, they don't have so many answers. Okay, they might have Edict, they might have Liliana in their main board, but Liliana and Edict, Edict can be a problem, but Liliana is not really.
You've looked at like 10 cards in your hand by the time. 10 cards on top of your deck by the time they do that. So you're almost setting up for the second Atraxa. And I'm just going to tell you why I personally am very attracted to this deck, because I'm a Grease fan playing Pioneer. I like to have that angle of attack. But it's a package where you can attack from multiple angles. So you've got this mid-range package. But what I like about your deck as well, that not only you've got this mid-range package that people have to be aware of, and you can pressure people with the the big stinking threat attached to it, but you've also got threats through your lands. Now it's really hard as an opponent to be like, oh, at what point do I start answering the mid-range strategy? At what point do I start answering the land strategy? Then to expose myself to a big stinky Atraxa.
Exactly.
One of the cards I just want to talk about if you can, because this is I get a lot of people saying this card is awful. I get a lot of people saying this card's amazing. Case of the Stash Skeleton. Tell me about that card.
So this card. So every time I play this card, I have people like say, "Can I please read the card?" Which is usually the sign of what the hell is that, right? And I think this card actually made this archetype extremely strong and extremely viable as well. So I'm always a bit surprised when it doesn't have such a big share in the meta. So Case of Stash Skeleton is a relatively new card. It was released in Murders of Karlov Manor, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what it does is quite simple. So cost 2 mana, 1 black, 1 colorless, and you create a 2/1 black skeleton token that is suspected. And that means it has menace and it can block. So already this is good for us because it gives us a 2/1, which can put still some pressure on the battlefield, and is a target for Transmogrify, right? So you have an additional enabler for your strategy. But then what makes it really good is if they remove the skeleton, then you solve the case at the beginning of your end step, and then basically you have a demonic tutor on the battlefield you can use. So you can pay then again black mana and 1 colorless, and then you can tutor for any card you have in your deck. And this is extremely powerful because obviously you can fetch a Transmogrify, of course. Yeah. So if you have 6 mana, you could sack the case, get Transmogrify, use it on a creature, right? So there is this line. But often also a good line is just fetching like Thoughtseize, right? You wanna make sure the coast is clear, and then you can do Transmogrify. Or really, you can fetch anything you need for that particular moment, right? So it's not always correct to fetch Transmogrify. Maybe you want to fetch your sweeper, you want to fetch Obnixilis, you want Fable, whatever. So it's really extremely good. It does everything the deck wants. I think not playing 4 in this kind of deck is a mistake. It really
That makes sense.
gives the deck, let's say, also a new angle to attack.
And you were saying that a lot of the time your opponent refuses to kill the skeleton, and you just become 2/1 beatdown plan, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. They rather die than give you the tutor, which is fine by me. It's fine by me, I mean, there is also another interesting thing here, a little tip and tricks especially when playing paper Magic. If the opponent wants to remove the skeleton during your turn, always make sure that it's very clear if he's doing that in your, main phase or during your end step. Because if the opponent does it in your main phase, then, once you hit the end step, then the case is solved. Whereas if it does remove your skeleton during your end step, then the case technically is not solved yet. So you will need to wait another turn to have the case solved.
Yeah.
So it's very important you ask the question, when are you doing it, to the opponent, because it can make quite a big difference. So that's, for me, the main thing to remember about the case. Yeah.
So we've alluded to... Oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah. No, just one last thing about the case, because as you can tell, I love it so much. Another interesting thing with the case, in some matchups, especially game 1, where maybe your deck is not really optimized, sometimes it's correct just to fatal push your own skeleton again during your main phase.
Yeah.
And as a former Rakdos sacrifice enthusiast, I love to kill my own creatures. So it just sparks joy to fatal push my own skeleton for my own benefit. So.
And it has a lot of synergy.
It's a power move. It's a power move.
Yeah. It has a lot of synergy with Torch the Tower as well, right? Because it's a token, so you can bargain it away.
Oh yeah, exactly. So Torch the Tower, great. Enables you to kill the token. Obnixilis, same story, right? So I think it's a very powerful if you go turn 2 skeleton, turn 3 Obnixilis with casualty on the skeleton. Like in some matchups, it's so backbreaking.
Yeah.
And some people were telling me, "Oh, that feels like the old Junt, right? That you're going turn 2 Tarmo, turn 3 Liliana, and that almost gives a bit similar vibes." So yeah, that's and then you get a tutor, by the way, out of that little casualty or bargain. So that's great. Yeah.
So before we talk, because I know you've got some tips and tricks written down for us to talk about, but before we do that, we'll say that towards the end. Can we just talk about your sideboard and your sideboard options, like why they're in your deck? We're not going to talk about what you sideboard in and out against certain matchups, because you've generously made a sideboard plan for us that we're going to attach this to the show notes, this podcast. So just tell us, go through your sideboard, why it's in there, and yeah.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room is Sire of Insanity, right? Exactly. Let's get that out of the way.
Let's start with that one. Let's start with Sire. That's a good one to start with.
So, Sire of Insanity is so good against Lotus because, at turn 4 Sire of Insanity against Lotus, it's really backbreaking for them, right? Like, I mean, good luck doing your combo if, you just have to hope you top deck that single card that's somehow allows you to do the whole combo thing. Of course, they can still win. It's not a auto win card by any means. They could still top deck, pour over the pages, and
and go off. Yeah.
Get lucky
and go off. But let's be honest, definitely they need to be quite lucky, and the probability is not that high that they manage to do the combo. And also, let's not forget this gentleman is a 6/4, right? So he can close out the game pretty quick. In fact, against Lotus, what I like to do, I like to remove all the Atraxas and just put this little cheeky guy into the deck, because I don't want to hit the Atraxas actually against Lotus. I just want to hit this gentleman because, yeah, that's how you win against Lotus. And speaking of Lotus, you can see my, let's say, hate for the deck by having 3 Damping Spheres.
Yeah.
Because I admit I lost a couple of times against Lotus. Yeah, the most painful loss was in the semi-final of one of the last RCQ I participated. So I decided to go from 2 to 3 and bring in Sire of Insanity. Yeah. And it really does work. Now, of course, they can still win, but if you mull hard against Lotus for a Damping Sphere or a Transmute turn 4, you have some good chances to win. Yeah.
Just hope you don't top deck a Sire Insanity and it stays in your deck.
That is the feel bad moment. The good thing about Sire, you can still cast it for 6 mana since it's Rakdos color. But let's be honest, if you're making it to 6 mana against Lotus, you're probably winning.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a feel bad moment. You're right. But hopefully the deck can put pressure through other means, through Obnixilis or the tokens.
Yeah,
it could still win potentially, but yeah, it's a feel bad. I agree. Then we have Duress again. That comes in all the matchups where you're afraid the opponent might bring in a lot of counter spells or spot removals, where you want to make sure the coast is clear for your Transmogrify. So it's actually a big enabler, especially in matchups like Phoenix. I always like to bring Duress. Or, of course, control. Like, if you're facing blue-white control, you definitely want the rest. You want to make sure the coast is clear for your Transmogrify. Extinction Event. I love that card. I bring it in mainly against Vampire. So, in fact, against Vampire, I'm only bringing, and you'll see it in the Sideboard guide, just 2 Extinction Event and 1 Obnixilis in. So, very limited sideboard changes. An Extinction Event hits Vampires so hard, because if you think about it, most of their creatures are 2 mana or 0 mana or 6 mana, so they're all even except for the Preacher. But it hits so many things, and it can be such a blowout for the Vampire players, so I always like to bring it. There is also Mono Green that is becoming popular again these days, so that's also a good card to have against them, since most of the threats are odd. And of course, Phoenix, Luis. As you know, a lot of even numbers in the Phoenix deck.
Yeah,
so
unfortunately.
I also like it against Phoenix. Yeah. I think it hits everything in Phoenix.
Except Brazen Borrower. Get wrecked, scrub. Let's go. 3-1 flyer.
It's gonna dodge the wipe. Yes. You have Go Blank.
Speaking
Probably,
of Phoenix.
yes, good against Phoenix. Exactly. You see a pattern here. It's also good against
Lotus Field?
any kind of control deck.
Yeah.
Bring to light, where you don't need so much spot removal. That really helps you to make sure the coast is clear.
Yeah.
Then we have Hidetsugo Consumes All. I'm really liking this card.
I love this card.
Yeah.
I love this card.
So you know the good stuff, Josh.
Yeah.
I love this card. I was running only one, then I went up to 2. Now sometimes I'm even contemplating whether 3 is correct.
Jeez.
Because it does so much against, especially decks like Gruul Prowess or Red Deck and Soul. Against them, Soul is such a blowout. You kill all their tokens. And also it exile all graveyards, which is actually relevant. So it's a bit awkward, possibly, and maybe this is a hot take that a lot of people might not agree with me. But I started bringing it even against Phoenix, even though you're not running any permanents that is 1 mana value or less. But
answers young Pyromancer tokens. That's all I can see.
Yeah, that it does. Yeah, you're right. Those are hit. But the Exile All Graveyard is actually powerful against Phoenix. You either force them to Treasure Cruise because they're like, I'm gonna get all my precious graveyard exiled. So you force some awkward cruises, or they simply don't have the cruise, and then you get to exile all of it. So I'm finding, and then last but not least, very interesting interaction against Phoenix. The flip side, right? So it turns into a 3/3, and for Phoenix actually is quite a problem, because you have to think they just lost all their graveyard potentially, and they might have Fiery Impulse, not able to deal 3 damage because they just got their exile.
Yeah.
So I mean, for sure they could go cantrip into cantrip. I'm not saying it's impossible for Phoenix to deal with the 3/3, but there are scenarios that they not happy to see a 3/3. And also this guy, every time he connects, and it has trample, by the way, it gets bigger, right? So it becomes 3/3, then a 4/4, 5/5, and so on. And soon will get really difficult to manage also for Phoenix player, but it can be a win con on his own, especially on the aggro matchup. Then we have Obnixilis, second copy. So that's what I like to bring against vampires especially, but also control. Or bring to light. It just
mid-range and control,
pressure. Yeah, against bring to light also it's quite interesting because they often like to go Unmoored Ego and just remove Atraxa from your deck, and Obnixilis can still make you win. If left unchecked, it becomes really difficult to answer for control or bring to light.
Yeah.
Talking about Obnixilis, actually, little tips and trick. You can casualty your own Atraxa, and then you can ultimate Obnixilis on the spot. So a lot of people don't see that coming, and it happens actually a lot, because you have to think Atraxa is showing you 10 cards, right, out of your deck. So there is a good chance one of them is an Obnixilis, especially if you go up to 2 copies. And then a lot of people, they don't think they can get, hit 7 damage to Atraxa, and then another 7 through Obnixilis. So the deck suddenly has some, damage out of the blue that people don't think about it.
Yeah.
So really good card. Then we have Redcap Melee. So this is a bit, let's say, of a personal preference. So I obviously brought it because Slickshot is, at least in my meta, is quite popular. So a lot of people are running it. And Soul is also a popular choice. And Redcap Melee basically answers all this. It also answers, by the way, Quintorius, which it is also played since it hits Planeswalker, and it's a red card.
Yeah.
And Josh, I started sometimes bringing it also against Greasefang.
Yep.
Because yes, I know it's not a red creature, but actually Redcap Melee can hit Greasefang for 4 damage at instant speed. Okay, you need to sacrifice a land, so that's not ideal. but you're running 26 lands, and sometimes you have to kill Greasefang. It's better to, lose one land
then lose the game.
Then lose the game. Exactly. So I really like it. I was running before Rending Volley, but I think at the moment Redcap is the, let's say, at least from my perspective, is the best sideboard card.
I like Redcap.
Yeah. If you want to be a bit more hipster, you can also run Chandra's Defeat, by the way.
Yeah.
Probably most of the text there will not be really relevant, but Chandra's Defeat actually does one thing that Redcap melee doesn't do, which is deal 1 additional damage. So Chandra's Defeat is 5 damage for a red creature or Planeswalker. And this can be relevant against other, I don't know if you're facing the mirror or you're facing other Gigantas.
I knew you were going to say Gigantha.
I was about to say Gigantha then.
Always in my heart.
I hate that card.
So that's sort of any more on the sideboard, because I think this would be a good chance to talk about any little tips and tricks before we sort of end the pod. So I know you've put together a list of tips and tricks for this deck. There's one that I quite liked from Heartless Act that you said.
So Heartless Act, I love that card because yes, it's obviously, it's a removal. Everybody knows that. But it does another very interesting thing. You can remove up to 3 counters from target creature. So this deck has a very interesting line. You can start with your Case of Stash Skeleton and then use Heartless Act to remove 3 counters from the Archfiend of Dross, which is a card that sees a lot of plays in Rakdos Vampire. And basically that card says that if you remove all the oil counters on that card, then, if you control Archfiend of the Dross, you lose the game. So this is literally an instant win against Archfiend of the Dross. Of course, they can still remove it potentially, but if they have no way to interact with their own Archfiend of the Dross, they just lose on the spot. And you need really a one-off. As I said, you can always tutor it, so it comes up more often than you think against Vampire players. So that's definitely one of my favorite lines of the deck. Another line I really like of the deck. We talk about Obnixilis Casualty, where you can casualty on the Atraxa to go ultimate. That's obviously a sweet line. We talk about the Mutavault trick that you should always wait until the very last moment to play your Mutavault because it's a target for Transmogrify.
Yeah.
But there is something that I think is also very important when it comes to Transmogrify, is actually picking the right target for Transmogrify. You need to think what kind of removals your opponent is running. So I give you an example. If you're playing against, I don't know, again, Rakdos Vampires, right? They probably have Fatal Push. So it might be smart to actually use Transmogrify on your Giganta rather than your token. Because then you're playing around that Fatal Push, or maybe even your Flip Fable token. That's something that, if they cannot activate Revolt, that's the right thing to do. Like, pick always the right target. Another thing is Vanishing Verse. So Bring to Light plays a lot of Vanishing Verse as a spot removal. And it says target monocolored. But always remember you have Reckoner Bankbuster. That's a colorless creature. So it's actually dodging that Vanishing Verse. Of course, you can get hit by another removal.
Is Mutavault colorless as well? It doesn't count as colorless, does it?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. Correct. Or the Sokenzan Spirit token, they're also colorless. So
Mirax as well.
Yeah, always try to play around what kind of removal your opponent might have. Just not go for the, let's say, the token you care the least, just because it doesn't look that relevant. So you say, okay, whatever, I'm gonna do Transmogrify on my skeleton. Sometimes it's worth it to do on the Bankbuster or Giganta, even at the cost of maybe losing some value. But once you hit your Atraxa, you're probably gonna win. So you might as well sacrifice Jaggy, our Lord and Savior Jaggy, for the right cause.
Very interesting. It's also good against if an opponent's running Go for the Throat or Heartless Act. Well. Record Egg Bankbuster is both an artifact and has counters on it, so they can't really remove it very easily now, can they?
Exactly. So always think, what kind of removal my opponent has, how can I play around it? Of course, sometimes they might have Leyline Binding, so it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. But in some cases, it makes a difference, right? And all it takes is one Atrax on the battlefield, and you might have won that game. So try to maximize that chance. Play Transmogrify slow. You don't need to really rush it. It's not a deck that you're like, oh, if I don't do it turn 4, I'm going to run into issue. Just take it easy. If you suspect the opponent has some removal, just take your time, grind them out. Let that removal rot in their hand until you can maybe discard it with the Thoughtseize or something like that. So don't rush. Maybe last tip that I want to give about this deck. It's a very interesting line that actually happened in the final of this tournament that I won in Germany. The opponent, he was on mono green, and he played Gravedigger Cage. And Gravedigger Cage is actually a very good hate piece against Transmogrify, because basically, it doesn't work against creativity, but it does work very well against Transmogrify. So I couldn't use my Transmogrify. But what the opponent didn't think about is that if they have a Gravedigger Cage on the battlefield, all my Transmogrify, they actually become 4 mana exile creature. Because then the opponent cannot go through his deck either. So it's a symmetrical effect. So all this to say, if you see a Gravedigger Cage, don't, it might be still relevant to keep your Transmogrify and not just discard them through a Fable trigger, because they can be, it's a 4 mana. Okay, it's a bit a lot for a removal, but it's still exiles. And in that matchup, he was playing with Volborn Tyrant, so it was actually very relevant. I was exiling, and then I was able to swing for lethal. So it doesn't come up often, of course, yeah. But that's definitely an interesting interaction you should keep in mind.
Very cool tips and tricks. Thank you very much for that, Marco. We appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for... Sorry, before we move on to that, I will say though, with the tips and tricks, you've wrote these down, haven't you? So we're going to attach that document or whatever form it's in onto the show notes as well.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
And there might be some others that I forgot to talk about, so you're very much welcome to give it a short read. It's a very simple document, just a 1 page, so not a lot to read. But these are some of the cool interactions and lines I've picked up by playing the deck quite a bit. So yeah, hope you all find it interesting.
And thank you very much for all the tips and tricks and everything you've shared. Thanks for everyone for listening as well for this nice red-black Transmogrify deck tech, and listening to Marco's Rage Boner against Rakdos Vampires. We highly appreciate all of you listening and tuning into our deck techs and general podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over, and I'll try my best to get Marco to answer them whenever possible. And
Marco, have you got any social media plugs you want to do? Your Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and then we'll plug them now if you want to, and then we'll add them to the show notes. And if you're open to questions,
absolutely happy to answer and also interact with the community, really. So by no means I'm the most proficient player of this deck in the world, so I'm very happy to just discuss if somebody has some other great ideas. Yeah, happy to test them out.
So where can they find you on social media?
I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that sense. But I have a Discord tag, and I'm active in the Chat Magic Discord group. So Probably that's the easiest way to reach out to me. Yes.
So I'll attach what I can onto the notes in the bottom. Look out for the Discord. Look out for talking to Marco there. If he has any Twitter handles or anything, I'll be sure to put them there as well. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Like I was saying, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hopefully, see you at the next podcast, guys. Take care and have a wonderful one.
See you guys.
Bye bye.